Good evening, everyone. Today, Raika Chaviv and I will be interviewing Miss Madhuri Model, and here's a little introduction on her. So, Miss Madhuri is grown up in the Andamans, and she's lived near rainforests and coastal ecosystems, and she's always been fascinated by them. She gave up her career as a software engineer to be close to nature and work towards environmental sustainability. She is qualified in natural resources and governance from the Tata Institute of Social Science and also in information technology from Osmania University. Currently, she is a part of a foundation called Dakshin, and some of her other interests include birding, documenting biodiversity, and also environmental education. Miss Madhuri, you have a very interesting bio. You started your career as a software engineer and have since moved back to nature and now work in the space of environmental sustainability. To many, this would appear a very bold move. My question is, what made you make this shift?
Hi, Sanvi. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to interact with you guys. The question, you have given a wonderful introduction already. And to start with answering your question, you already mentioned how Andamans is. I guess you all have a little bit of idea of what sort of ecosystems exist, what rich and diverse ecosystems, biodiversity exist in Andamans. So I was lucky to grow up in a rural rural village from an agricultural background in North Andamans. The place is called Diglipur, and it is the northernmost part of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And my family has migrated to Andaman and Nicobar Islands in 1956. My great grandfather, they have migrated during the partition when India, during 1947, they came from East Bengal to the West Bengal, and then they were given settlement in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, like other families were also given settlement. So we were lucky that we got to live in those islands. And my father is a science teacher who also has a big love for the environment. And that is one of the primary reasons the love for nature was inculcated in me. So from the childhood, he loves exploring, traveling. So he would take us to beaches for picnics, and then he would take us for intertidal walks where he would show us a lot of marine life. So all these small things, taking us to the forest, showing the amazing biodiversity there, all these things. And he loves fishing and being close to nature. I think growing up in those sort of an environment, looking at the amazing rainforest, the coastal marine biodiversity, all those had given me that inculcating those admiration for nature had come. When I came to Hyderabad for my engineering in 2005, yeah. So during that time, I had no idea during my 11th, 12th, or 10th what career opportunities lay in this sort of field in if I had to work on environment. At that time, we had no clarity. When I came here for my engineering, I started missing the natural beauty of Andamans, the ecosystems. And here, all I found was concrete jungles. I somehow finished my engineering, though I never was a great fan of being an engineer. Then I started working with a software company. I worked in Mumbai for 4 years, and then again in Hyderabad for 2.5 years. And all this while, I realized that this is not something I would like to do for the rest of my life. So while living in Mumbai, while working in Mumbai, I started going on nature trails. I looked up for organizations who work with environment, and I started volunteering with them. I did a course, online course. Now these days, these are very famous, but back then in 2011, I did this 1 year course in biodiversity conservation with Bombay Natural History Society. So during that time, I got an opportunity to go to a lot of nature camps, nature trails, um, get into birding. So during that phase was when I thought that I have to shift my career and this is what I love to do. And also during that time living in the cities, I realized how our environment is getting polluted, how wildlife is going extinct, and what are the environmental issues which currently we have, which are huge. So I decided that I will do a course in this sector, which will give me more understanding of the whole system on in how in the whole environmental sector works, or how conservation works. And then I would start working in this field. Then I started looking for colleges, courses in this field. And during that time, there were hardly any courses in wildlife conservation, in environmental sector. But yeah, slowly I got one thing led to another. I quit my job. I did my master's in natural resources and governance. And then I started working with the Wildlife Conservation Society for a year. And then currently, I've been working with Dakshin Foundation for the past 2.5 years. So that's my journey to this field, Sanvi.
That's really interesting. So to most of us, Andamans is an exotic holiday location. So you were, of course, fortunate to grow up there. So can you tell us a little more about your life in Andamans and how it shaped your outlook towards life and what you do?
Yeah, exactly. So, like I mentioned, I grew up till my ninth standard. I was living in a village, and my family belonged to an agricultural family. So, I saw how we grow food. Then somehow we had to, I mean, for my education, my parents decided that we moved to a city. And like all the kids in Andamans, I think these days also there's a lot of pressure to do either become a doctor or engineer. And that's how I think after ninth standard it was a little, tuitions and studies that was heavy. But I would actually say that my childhood was amazing, because we had a pond, we had forests in our backyard. So all those small things, looking at the butterflies running behind butterflies while I was growing up, and that whole environment, looking how, during the monsoons there would be paddy growing everywhere, and then the colors with every season would change. And I think all this you get to experience when you live in a village. We used to go running in the paddy fields. So I think, and little experiences like this, I mean, I was lucky. Nowadays these opportunities are not there. So we used to go to uninhabited islands and stay there overnight. Now you don't get permits for that. So we would go there, camp overnight under the moon, just beside the ocean. And that sort of, I think, experiences which I feel have inculcated that strong sense of admiration about nature, which ultimately has led me, taking this field as my career. Does that answer your question, Raika?
Yeah, it definitely does. That's incredibly fascinating. So, of course, being an environmentalist is a very broad term. What specifically interests you in the field? What does being a marine environmentalist mean to you?
Cool. Yeah. So basically, as you mentioned, yeah, environmentalist is a broad term, and there are it could have different meanings, and there are a lot of different ways of being an environmentalist. It's not that if somebody is actually their career is in this field, then only they can be an environmentalist. Somebody can just take it up on their own. They can be working in the software sector and they can be an environmentalist as well. It depends on what they do for the environment, or how much concerned they are for the environment, what are the steps they take to protect the environment. That is how I would broadly say that is how an environmentalist should be defined, not as a career. But yeah, I wanted to work in this, full time, not just as a part time, but this is where I wanted my career to be. I wanted to work full time in this. So for me, what interests me, or what sort of um, interests me or excites me in this whole marine and coastal environmental sector is, or basically the whole natural resource management sector, which is a slightly different from conservation in general. This also leads to conservation, but it's not narrowed to wildlife conservation itself. So what I work, or what marine conservation for me is, basically looking at all the resources, such as the coastal marine resources. Coastal resources will have the beaches, and on the beach, on the coast, there are several sort of biodiversity there. And this biodiversity is not only just wildlife. There are trees, there are um, different sort of other animals which live on the coast, that could be marine, intertidal, and you also have heard about turtles coming to nest on the beaches. That is whole set of the coastal environment. And then going beyond the marine, which is the underwater biodiversity, where you have coral reefs, you have fishes, and huge sort of biodiversity which is there under the ocean or seas. So this whole sector is the marine and coastal sector. And in that, what we sort of miss out while we think about these areas is the people who live there. So there are this all the coast. India has huge coast, and throughout the coast, fishing communities live, coastal communities live, like island communities, where I grew up in Andamans. And throughout the coast, from you can start from West Bengal, Orissa, down south to Tamil Nadu, or there's Lakshadweep, and this side Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala. All the coasts have fishing communities who live in these coasts, who work and live very closely in these spaces and interact very closely with the coastal and marine environments. So my work, or to manage or to protect the coasts, or to protect the wildlife or natural resources or biodiversity in these areas, one has to work with the communities who live in these spaces, who actually are sort of the closest to these areas. And that is what I do. So while working with Wildlife Conservation Society, my work was to understand, that was more focused on terrestrial ecosystems. I used to work more closely in the tiger reserves in Telangana and in Andhra. During that phase, I was trying to understand the communities who live within the tribal reserves, such as the Adivasi communities, and how they interact with the wildlife there. It could be tigers or other mammals, and how they manage, because there are herbivores, there are deers, there are wild boars who come and attack their crops. So there is some sort of conflict there, some sort of tension going on there. And similarly, in the coastal spaces where I work currently, the fishing communities, as I mentioned, they go out to the sea, they fish, they use that space, they are dependent on that space. So to actually work or protect these areas, you need to work with these communities. And that is why what I primarily do, I engage with these communities. I work with them for their well-being. So I work with this program. I lead the program called Community Wellbeing and Environment at Dakshin Foundation. So what we do is we work with some coastal communities or fishing hamlets. So my primary sites are in Orissa, and 2 fishing communities in Orissa and 2 in Andamans. So I work with these communities, one, to improve their well-being. That means their health, their livelihoods, and then to improve the overall environmental well-being where they live. That means, working on waste management, working on the coasts, working on the other environmental issues which might be there in these areas. And Dakshin in general has been working on other, it could be, turtle conservation or sharks and rays. And a lot of research also goes behind all these. So there is research, which also excites me a lot, which is very important to know before working, before practice comes research. So what actually, be it about wildlife or be it about the people who live in these areas, on how and what they do and why they do all those things, And not only just the people there, very importantly, the policies which actually regulate, which manage these resources, the wildlife, everything. So we look at the policies, we look at the, and we work with government officials like fisheries department. We work with other officials which are, present in the district level, and we work with these communities who are the actual main important stakeholders in these areas. So there is a lot to do. There is a lot of things we are planning and we are doing. Due to COVID, a lot of things got a little slower, but we still did a lot of work last year. We helped the migrant fish workers, the fishing communities during the COVID crisis. So work more or less has been very interesting and exciting all this while. And I get to, visit the islands more often after I started working with Dakshin, because we have a long-term research base, which is called Andaman and Nicobar Environmental Team, ANIT, in South Andaman. It's a beautiful space where the researchers go and stay. So I go and stay there, and my one of the project sites is in Vandur, which lies beside Mahatma Gandhi Marine National Park, which is there are two marine national parks in Andamans. So this is one of the marine national parks, where also I did my master's research. My dissertation was to look at how the communities living around the park interact with the national park, marine national park. And this is different from the national parks you see in the mainland India. So this national park has different islands and a very different sort of ecosystems, coral reefs, mangroves, creeks, saltwater crocodiles, and whatnot. So yeah, all that has been exciting part of my work. Yeah.
Thank you. It was quite fascinating to know about what you do. And I can only imagine what it was like living in those areas. So coming to that, you also conduct nature trails, bird watching trails, and understand beach walks when you're in the Andaman. So what about these activities excites you the most?
Yeah, thanks, Shaviv, for bringing us to that discussion. So yeah, like I mentioned before, I started going for bird watching on nature trails while I was in Mumbai with Bombay Natural History Society. Then when I moved to Hyderabad in 2014, I joined this group called Deccan Birders now. Earlier it was called Birdwatchers Society of AP. So with them, I started going on birding. And that's how I actually survived my corporate years because I detested working in a, sitting in a cabin the whole day. And I would look forward to the weekends where I could go out, be in the nature. And I used to just wait for the weekends or long weekends. So when that, that is something which makes me so happy. And that started inculcating the sense of responsibility. And, that led me shift my career. Then I realized I should also, inculcate or initiate these for others who have some interest. So actually, while I was in the corporate, I was a part of this team called Go Green Team. So we had Go Green teams where we would do a lot of environmental sort of activities, be it cleanup activities. So I used to take my colleagues I was used to work with Cognizant Technology Solutions. So I used to take my colleagues for bird walks. In Mumbai, I took them to see flamingos. Lakhs and lakhs of flamingos come in the Suri beach. They're one of the mangrove creeks. In Hyderabad, there is Narsapur forest where I had taken my colleagues once for a bird watching. And the enthusiasm. And then with kites and nine pins, we had gone for bird watching, and I've conducted bird watching and nature trails for groups of kids. And the best thing is, I love the enthusiasm, the wonder which the kids and adults have when they actually get to know about these amazing birds or insects or wildlife. The amazement they get, and especially the kids have huge curiosity, and that one thing leads to another. So when they start observing and asking questions, their mind also goes on and starts thinking about different things. So for me, I think it's the best thing that the love for nature which I have, if I can, pass it on to others and see that excitement, enthusiasm, and appreciation for nature in them, that makes my day. So I just love doing that. That has been very exciting. And yeah, I think from the time COVID has started, it was difficult to actually go on these group sort of activities. But I managed to do one in Vandoor in this April with the village kids where my project is. So I took rural kids for bird watching. They already know about their biodiversity much better than I think the city kids. But it was still nice for them to actually see what sometimes we take things granted if that is always available around us. So that was also amazing for me that, even the rural kids liked it. The village kids enjoyed watching birds, which are always there around them, but actually taking time to observe is something which I think through these nature trails we could inculcate, so that patience and observing skills is something which I really like, which comes through these trails.
It's nice to know that you spread your happiness and others got enthusiastic doing these bird trails. So now, how important do you think such bird trails and activities are in shaping your own thoughts towards the environment or the nature?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, when we observe and wonder at something, that is where our love and admiration starts. And then we start to know more about it, learn more about it, and understand more about it. So, for example, I'll give you an example. When sometimes we have so many birds around our homes, but we never realize. So when we start watching them, suppose you go for a bird watching trail, and then you get to know about 5 birds which you can see every day, but you were not aware of previously. Then you start looking at them, observing them, understanding them. And one bird, if you observe, you get to know about the ecosystem it lives in, the sort of relationships it has with other, it could be the tree where it lives, it could be with other birds, other creatures. So a whole, from one thing, it leads to the understanding of the whole ecosystem. And then you will see the other pressures which might be there. One day the tree might get cut for some reason, which might destroy the habitat for that bird and the other creatures living. So basically, what I feel is that this thought process of understanding creates a sense of responsibility and concern in anybody. So understanding leads to making more responsible citizens, and we start respecting the environment. Without understanding all these interconnectedness, all these appreciating all these things, we will not have the sense of responsibility. And some things, it gets lost, because I think when we start living in cities inside these 4 walls, that the isolation from nature makes us very disconnected, and we do not respect or appreciate those things. And I think this sort of nature trails and bird watching, or anything, just observing and understanding nature, can bring us back, bring all those values and appreciation back, which will take us closer to nature and give us the respect and responsibility towards nature again. So that is, I think, the first step for creating sustainable future.
That was a really nice way to put it. Now, save the earth and responsible consumerism, go green are some popular slogans. And in schools, we are sensitized towards how we are polluting the environment. We learn about things like the Pacific garbage patch as early as grade 3. However, there still seems to be a huge gap in what we study and what we implement. So, how do you think students like us can effectively be sensitized towards being more sustainable in our habits?
Right, Sanvi. So I think that's a very important question. So one thing, like I mentioned, we already discussed about how just observing and being closer to nature is one step. That is admiration and understanding. What else? So I think we need to, in schools, you all might be, you all are learning this through your books, through, I think, lessons and other materials. But in our day-to-day lives, what is missing is we need to understand the interconnectedness of things. So that is something, the practical aspect of it, I think, gets missing. So many, not only just in this field, I think in everything we learn theory, but during application, there is a huge gap. And same thing with policy and implementation. So here, what is basic is looking at everything and the interconnectedness of everything. For example, like you yourself mentioned that we talk about the huge garbage patch, but do we think that how much garbage we ourselves create on a day-to-day basis? So I would start with saying that we need to look at everything what we do, mainly what we consume, what we eat, what we wear, what we throw. So looking at what we consume, be it through food or through buying things, and what goes into our dustbin, these two things are the biggest, I think, ways to determine that interconnectedness. And this is, I mean, our individual actions, how it affects the environment. So looking at something which is happening in Pacific Ocean might not give you that perspective, but actually looking at things around us day to day, what we do. For example, we eat daily. That is something almost thrice or 4 times daily we eat. But do we all know where the food comes from? Who grows it? How do they grow it? What are the challenges they face in growing it? And not only those, you might know the farmers grow it, but exactly a little bit deeper we need to look into that. Do we know what are the challenges they are facing while growing it? We might also say, we should have organic food, which is true. We should prefer organic food. But do we know why, if they are using pesticides, if they are using inorganic fertilizers, why they are using it? What makes them do it? And how actually we could go towards organic food? Just sitting and at our home and thinking of buying organic food doesn't solve the problem. So I think we need to look at things a little deeply. We might all want to buy a lot of clothes, but do we know how much waste is generated, how much pollution is generated while producing a single t-shirt? So looking at these things, and especially where our garbage goes when we generate garbage, what garbage we generate? Can we compost our garbage at home? Can we reduce the waste we generate? Because if you go and look at any dumping site near your city, near your home, you'll be amazed to see, or surprised or shocked to see, the pollution which we can generate every day. So the garbage patch which is out there is not built on its own. It's because of our actions ultimately. So I think we need to look at overall the interconnectedness of things. That is what I would say. So look at each thing you do every day in detail, and ask where this thing has come from, who has made it, how it has been made. Yeah, that is what I would like to say on this.
Okay, so sustainable future has become a popular topic, but how essential is it to do this in order to make things the same for the future generations? And how can we reduce the usage of non-renewable but essential resources like oil and coal?
Yeah. So, Sanvi, this is similar to the previous question, but here a little bit deeper. I would say that it is definitely very important that it is everybody's responsibility to think about the next generation, the sustainable future for the coming generations. And I think I'm very glad that the younger generation, the kids especially, are getting more aware of these things and are getting more responsible, because we know the future is at risk. So there are two things again. I've been talking about individual responsibility. So there are two levels what everybody can do. One thing is our individual responsibility. Like I mentioned, looking at our own consumption, looking at what we eat, what we wear, what garbage we throw. So reducing or living a sustainable lifestyle is one step which becomes our individual responsibility. But there is something called collective responsibility. So you talked about consumption, of how we can reduce our consumption of oil and petroleum or fossil fuels in general. So one thing is, definitely we can take public transportation, we can switch off electrical appliances, but there is a little bit something deeper also, because our individual actions might not be able to change the whole system. So we also need to understand, like I was telling, how what policies are there which actually, national, at our national level and at global level, we need to understand the politics, the policies, the politics, the government, the international and national. There is something called conference of parties where decisions are made about climate change. So there is a lot of things which are happening, which we need to understand and look at whether our government, be it our sitting at the national, at the center, or our local governments, are taking the right steps. And for that, to raise our voice as citizens, we need to come together. So I would give you an example. There is something called the Global Climate March, which happened in this Friday in Hyderabad also. So there is something called Fridays for Future Telangana on Instagram page, where they're active and speaking about environmental issues, climate change, even in Hyderabad. So nowadays, a lot of things are happening. So we also need to look at how we can come together and then raise our voice against all these larger forces, because our individual action is important but might not be able to change things as immediately, as quickly as the whole system is changing, as the whole the issues are coming at us at a very fast pace. And we also need to, I think, come together and raise our voices, take action to make it more effective.
Okay, so can you give a few examples on how seemingly simple human activities they harm the environment? A build up to the previous question. What little steps can we do to make the world a better place?
Yeah. So yeah, I was already talking about this. I think small things we can do at our level, and definitely come together and see what are these other things which are happening around us. If people are getting coming together, if we can also join them, that is one thing. And individually at our home, some practices like composting our first segregating our waste, composting our waste, that could be wonderful, because we can reduce a lot of waste from going into dumping yards, and which creates a lot of environmental pollution. And then looking at our own consumption by looking at whether we are using single use plastics, so reducing that, our use of single use plastics, where we, like I was mentioning about food, are we ordering food regularly, and if that comes in plastic. So all these small things, you all know about the other things which I was talking about. We need to always mostly use try at least to use public transportation. I know things have been difficult because of COVID, but we need to be aware of the small things we can do. And you might be hearing all those things throughout, like in on the social media or through your school. You might have heard a number of times about planting trees and all that. But I would say, be it anything, look at the logic behind it, understand the whole thing, do not blindly do anything, understand the issues and what your step is creating, what impact it is creating. So something, for example, I would say why you need to look deeper, something like tree plantation is definitely needed. But we also need to look at what sort of trees are we planting. Are we planting exotic tree species, which creates another set of problems? or are we planting native trees, which is actually found in that ecosystem? Are we clearing up our grasslands to plant trees? Which we shouldn't, because grasslands are a unique ecosystem on its own. So we need to look a little deeper and not just blindly follow what people say. So at this stage, because you all are young, you all are studying in middle school or primary school, so anything which is told to you, look behind it, try to unravel, try to understand things deeper. And I think most importantly, which I don't know, we'll get a chance to talk about it, but you all, I mean, like I mentioned previously, we all can be environmentalists. We don't have to stick to this career or choose it as a career. But if you all are interested in, you know, somehow, if you have that eagerness or sense of responsibility towards the environment and you want to choose it as a career, there are a lot of options. So for example, in the marine sector, there is, I mean, definitely marine biology. There is something which I read, which is natural resource management. There is environmental science. There is wildlife science. There are a number of courses, and not only these direct courses. Even if one studies social science, political science, economics, if anybody can shift their career, or you know, these all things actually come together to take or make decisions or work towards environment. For example, environmental law is equally important, because everything ultimately, you know, if there is an environmental violation, we need an environmental lawyer. We need a policy advocacy, a person who understands policy to actually comment on policies which government prepare. Be it, you might have heard about the environmental the forest policy. There is the environmental laws which have come. So all we can study, I mean, anything. If we are interested in this field, we can actually you know, find some or the other ways to contribute to this field.
Thank you so much for that. That was very insightful. So many people don't know how important halophytes and other marine plants are help to the ecosystem. For example, mangroves. Can you please touch upon how these marine plants help us in our daily lives?
Yeah, definitely. So halophytes are plants which can survive in saline conditions. And you mentioned mangroves, which is what I have seen growing up very closely, because I think Andamans, the mangroves in Andamans are very beautiful. I've also seen mangroves in Mumbai, and these are very important ecosystems. Mangroves, they provide the breeding grounds. They're the nurseries for breeding of fisheries, fish, when they come to lay eggs, and the fish eggs sort of hatch. That is where, because the water is there are no big waves. It's more or less a little slower, or the tides are not very heavy. It gives us safer space for the fish breeding and prawns breeding place. So that is one of the, so it's kind of restocking of the fisheries. It is our natural nurseries. Apart from that, mangroves provide habitat for other lot of birds. There are birds which are only found in mangrove ecosystems, like the mangrove pitta, mangrove whistler. You will find them only in the mangrove ecosystems. There is fishing cat, a lot of wildlife, and you might have already heard about the Sundarban tigers and all. And Bhitarkanika is also a unique mangrove ecosystem in Orissa. So that is, the wildlife aspect is one aspect, but it also provides huge protection to our coasts from cyclones, from tsunami. So in places in Andamans, when tsunami had come, mangroves had protected the many places from the impact of tsunami. And regularly our coasts are prone to cyclones, especially in Orissa. There is a cyclone, huge cyclone in West Bengal and Orissa every year during the, you know, towards the end, year end. And the impact of these cyclones, the waves, the wind is reduced by mangroves. So there are many studies, research, which proves that if mangroves are there, the villages and the other resources are protected, are in a better shape. That is one thing. Plus, they also provide a lot of food services, ecosystem services to say, like the honey, in Sundarban and in Orissa and a lot of places. So there are these huge honey combs, and the villagers go there, collect the honey. So it provides them firewood also. So food, livelihood opportunities are provided, and a lot of other ecosystem services like nutrient recycling. So it's overall a very important sort of ecosystem for us. And how day-to-day life, for sitting in the cities, it will be difficult to say, but everything, like I was talking, everything is interconnected. So mangroves, like any other trees, play a huge part in um, doing photosynthesis, for example. So it is sequestering lot of the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and all. So there is innumerable, I don't know if you have heard of this term called ecosystem services previously, but basically ecosystem services are services which are provided by ecosystems like these, like I was describing about mangrove ecosystems. And these are the type of services which I was telling. One is the protection services, one is the provisioning services, one is the habitat giving services. So all these are services provided to us. Actually, we are the beneficiaries ultimately. But when these ecosystems are degraded, they are cut, the cost of this is not calculated. What we are losing is not calculated. We might create a port there someday, and we might think that it will help in our economic development, but what we are losing is usually neglected. So these are all things we need to know and appreciate and understand.
Thank you. That was a good touch up on the technical part and how these halophytes, they help us in ways even we don't realize. And now coming to the very exciting topic, which all of you might have been waiting for. What exactly is climate change? How does it affect the marine ecosystems and the wildlife?
Okay. So, Chavib, I guess you all might have, heard about this, touched upon this in your classrooms. There might be discussions around this. So, climate change is nothing but the abrupt changes in temperature, weather, in the global climate. And the reasons for this is important. What is causing this, abrupt changes in the weather, be it the rainfall patterns, be it the temperature rise, is basically human sort of impact on the environment. Mainly the green, you might have studied about greenhouse effect, greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases have the tendency to trap heat on Earth's surface, which is why also Earth can sustain life. But what happened is, there is this era from 1950s when industrialization increased, when we started rapidly burning fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, and the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane. So the industrialization and burning of fossil fuels have led to the increase of the CO2 levels, the carbon dioxide levels, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So when these gases increased, the trapping of the heat also increased. And when this trapping of the heat increased, the temperature on the Earth's surface started increasing gradually. But that gradual is not that gradual. If you see from the time we started living on this Earth, or Earth was created, there, if you see the graph of the temperature increase after 1950s, after the industrialization started, it's a constant rise. And that is what is scary, because this rise in temperature leads to other sort of catastrophic events. It can lead to events which are not under our control. And that is why it has become a very serious or important topic of discussion everywhere, especially globally, because the amount of greenhouse gases or produced by the developed countries is huge, and there is always this debate that who should reduce their greenhouse gas consumption, because we all need power, electricity, and coal and petroleum or burning of fossil fuels is required. But also we need to look at how this could be balanced, how this could be, and not only burning of fossil fuels, but other sort of our activities impacts like deforestation, because these are connected. If we burn the fossil fuels and the percentage of carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere, and there are less trees, so trees take up carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. You see this connection, right? So if the trees are less, so the recycling of this particular gas is also reduced. So all these things are happening together, and there is this growing agriculture, not industrial level of agriculture, and industrial farming of animals or livestock. So all these things are leading to this constant increase of this gas. Now, what are the impacts? We have understood the problem to a certain extent, that increase of greenhouse gases is leading to this temperature increase, which is actually leading to catastrophic events. But actually what these events are looking like, because I think understanding those impacts are very not very clear. There is a little fuzziness, because sometimes we say that the temperature is increasing, but there is cold. Like Trump has once said that there is so much cold, who says there is climate change. So there is a huge also a lobby of climate deniers who do not agree that climate change is happening, because their interests are different. They want to keep burning fossil fuels because that is how they earn money. So you also need to look at the politics which is happening behind. I wouldn't go deeper into it, but there are a lot of studies to prove that climate change is happening, and impacts are also happening, but the impacts are very varied. So if you look at the impacts at local level, if you look at the rainfall patterns in any area, so you would see this increase of temperature. You have heard about global sort of ice caps melting, polar bears getting extinct, so on, so far. But what locally, you would see the cities, there is more rainfall. I think in Hyderabad, places like Hyderabad also, if you look at the data, or at least even in Andamans or these southern states, there has been a constant increase, or I would not say increase also, but the pattern of rainfall, which month how much rainfall was happening and how much is currently happening, that all has shifted. So you will see sometimes there is more rainfall, there is cyclone, there is storm, untimely, and somewhere there is drought. In places there where at this season, ideally rain should fall and farmers are waiting for rainfall, you would see the rain hasn't come, and there is a huge drought. So it is this abruptness in the climate or the weather patterns, which is actually the proof of weather change. And then there is this increase in storms, cyclones, and other sort of flooding, especially sea level rise, which is evident. So the islands which are low lying, there has been a constant. I mean, places like, I think Venice, you might have heard, it might not be there, down the line 50 years, 100 years, because it's a very coastal city. Similarly, Andamans or Lakshadweep Islands, we are not sure how long they would be existing. So sea level rise is happening constantly. That is definitely a proven thing. And apart from that, what sort of breaks my heart is basically the dying of coral reefs. Have you heard of something called bleaching? So there is this beautiful coral reefs in Andamans, and I don't know how many years they will survive, because coral reefs are not present everywhere on this earth, and they need a specific temperature and conditions to survive. So near Andamans, there is that ideally that temperature in which corals and beautiful coral reefs exist. But what happens is when the temperature, so basically coral reefs are animals and they survive, they have a symbiotic relationship with an algae called zooxanthellae. So this algae provides food to the nutrition to the coral reefs and the colors to the coral reefs. So when there is a slight temperature increase, this algae leaves the coral or dies. And when the algae dies, which actually lives with the coral also dies because it doesn't get food and nutrition. So then the coral reef becomes white. That is called bleaching. It looks bleached white. And when the whole coral reef ecosystem dies, a lot of other fishes, a lot of other marine life depend on coral reefs. So this whole, if you know about trophic food web, trophic chain, one animal or one animal eats another, or plant. So all these like smaller herbivores depend on algae or zooplanktons, and then these smaller fishes are eaten by larger fishes or carnivore fishes, and then they are eaten by say sharks or predators fishes like groupers. So this whole marine ecosystem will collapse if the providers, if the food chain doesn't have its primary producers, or the ecosystem will collapse if they do not have the habitat or the food providers. So that is something which is very evident. I mean, it is going to be very evident in the near future. So that is another huge impact of um, climate change.
Thanks for that. You went quite deep over there. And now, to round up the interview, what has been the best part of your job personally? What memory have you cherished the most as a marine environmentalist?
So, Joy, I would say I love being on the field. I love so whenever I visit Andamans or Orissa, I love being a researcher, being a practitioner. So something which automatically comes to me is that whenever I am out there in the field, I keep observing, I keep looking at things and their interconnectedness, why something is happening, if the environment is getting degraded. My work also involves looking at fisheries sustainability. Fish provides us nutrition. So if fisheries is getting depleted, if fishes are reducing, why? So looking deeper into it, that's something which excites me. And also working with people there, engaging with the rural communities, the fishing communities, and trying to find out solutions with them, find out locally relevant solutions with them, because we don't want to implement something which we feel is right. We need to talk to them and understand their perspective. So all these things excite me. I love being on field. I love being in the forest, and like we talked about, going on nature trails, taking others to nature trails. And wherever I am, I'm observant, be it fishes or be it by any biodiversity, be it birds. I recently, in January, did my open water diving certification and looked at these wonderful, amazing coral reefs for a couple of days, like 3 4 days. I was underwater like almost the whole day, and that was one of the amazing few days of my life, I would say. And looking forward to being on field more, because of COVID, I couldn't be on field more. I think the last 1.5 year. So looking forward to be there in Andamans again for long term.
That's really interesting. And lastly, what advice do you give for young children and the coming generations? After all, the wealth of a country lies in its youth.
I think I have given enough suggestions today. There was so much of, I think, gyan. But yeah, again, I think that is as simple as is that be curious, be observant, ask difficult questions, try to understand everything deeply, and try to look at whatever you're doing in your day-to-day life, where that thing is coming from, what impact, what footprint you have through your activity. So yeah, it increases a little stress, but I think that's how currently the situation is. It's not like, every generation had its problems, but I think the current generation has even bigger sort of environmental issues to deal with. So if we make it a part of our sort of day-to-day cognizance, if we are, habituated to understand, look at our impact, then I think if everybody tries to do this and we also look at collective action, then I think there is some hope. Sanvi, does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers the
I
question
didn't
really
go
well.
in much depth again because I've been talking about the steps multiple times.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that. And before we sign off, can you share your pics of what work you've been doing?
Cool. I would share my screen then. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I would share some photos. So this is, you're able to see the photo?
Yes, yeah.
So this is one pic from one of the fishing villages where I work in Odisha. So these are small scale fishers and they use very traditional sort of boats and also nets of how we catch fish. So there is industrial level of fishing, big, large boats, but they still have been using smaller boats and gears, which is more sustainable than the industrial level of fishing. The photos are all mixed, so if you can see this, can you guess what these are on the beach? Anybody? Chavi, Sanvi, Raika?
Are they
Visible
turtles?
properly? Yeah. Yeah, these
Turtles?
are olive ridley turtles. So the place we work in Odisha, that is one of the mass nesting site of olive ridley turtles. So in the world, there are a couple of places where olive ridleys, these turtles, come in lakhs and lakhs for laying eggs, and this is during sometime in. So this happened in March. This is a photo from March last year. So I was there till the day before mass nesting happened, and then because of COVID, I had to come back. But lakhs and lakhs of turtles come on the beach, lay their eggs, and go back. So that is, you could look this up, this whole phenomena later, which is called mass nesting of olive ridley turtles in Rushikulia. And yeah, I'm lucky to be working in this site with these communities. This is another photo from Orissa, and this is a line of traditional fishing boats, and you could see people working on the beach, mending their nets. And this is how a small scale fishing community or their boats look like. I don't know if you got a chance ever to look at something like this. Yeah. Then I would show some pictures from my home. This is a vernal hanging parakeet, and this was on the guava tree recently when I was in Andamans in August, and they were feasting on the guavas on the tree beside my house. A very cute looking parakeet.
Oh, they are.
This is Andaman cockle. It is an endemic bird. So there are cockles in the mainland India also, but this one is found, this particular species is found only in Andamans. So this was also near the banana tree just beside
That's
my.
fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, so this is one just to give you an idea of what sort of dense forest is there. So this was a trail to one forest. We went for a bird watching trail one of the days in August with my father. Yeah, this is the bird watching in Vandoor in April I was talking about. Here there's a pond, and there was a kingfisher, but it was a rare kingfisher. It was a blue-eared kingfisher, which sometimes comes here, and we were lucky when we just started the bird watching trail. We got to see this. And this is the waste management awareness on the beach. So we did a walk, the ANET base, which I was talking about. It is quite near to the beach, and behind the ANET, there is mangroves and there is the beach next to it. So after bird watching, we spoke to the kids there about waste management. They do know a lot. We were thinking that they might not know, but they also are quite aware. I was happy to look at that. So this is a part of my work there. Yeah, this is something I was talking about. This is a composter at my home, which I keep in my balcony. And this is something with, I think, Kites and Ninepins also. I did a workshop earlier to tell how we can compost at home very easily. So you just have to mix your wet waste and some dry leaves, and it doesn't smell. This is a snap from my balcony. So this is how I put my composter. And one more photo from my balcony. This is one of the fishing communities in Andamans. It is the largest fishing community in Andamans where I work. Because yeah, I work with fishing communities, you will see. And so this is not a typical photo of what Andaman looks like for you, but I just wanted to put it out there because this is also what Andamans is. I intentionally didn't put a lot of pictures which might put you off. There's a whole lot of garbage which is there, and you won't believe those pictures are from Andamans. But my job is to work with these communities, work with the authorities to look at some of these problems. So yeah, I think that is what I would, that is what I would like to say, that we might look at the beautiful pictures of Andamans and think that everything is all, it is called exotic, it is called paradise, but it's not the reality. And the rate at which the environment is getting degraded there, be it, the coral reef bleaching, which I was talking about, or be it the waste management issues. And this is also created by consumption. So ultimately, it's not just that exotic, it's also getting degraded. And our responsibility is to understand and keep in mind all these issues and look at how we can reduce our consumption, or stop polluting these environments, and be just responsible citizens, be respected towards the environment, be concerned, and come together in whatever ways we can to protect the environment in whatever ways we can.
Thanks for that. That was fascinating and intriguing to know about more about the Andamans and what work you do there. And before we sign off, if there are any specific questions from the audience you would like to ask Ms. Madhuri, feel free to type them in the chat.
So can I take the question, Raina's question?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So Raina, you actually, because there are less people, you could also unmute yourself and maybe directly ask the question. But yeah, anyway. So I think that's a very important question. And that is where I think I have to again go back to talking about the interconnectedness of things. So like we've talked about the Pacific garbage patch. So how do you think it all landed up there in between the Pacific Ocean? Everything floats down to the oceans ultimately. So whatever we are consuming here, if we are drinking a bottle of water and we are throwing it just in our dustbin, that is taken to some dump yard, and from there, if it floods, if it rains heavily, it goes to the nearest whatever lake or water body, which again during some rains ends up going to some other river, and ultimately everything is dumped into the ocean. So that is something which we can at least understand, realize, and stop. So our simple activities like that, plus, like I mentioned, the whole climate change. So our activities, or all combined human activities, are actually creating this climate change. But people who are living around the coasts or living in villages who are dependent directly on natural resources, natural systems, or rains, or natural events for their livelihoods, for farming, for fishing, they are getting the most impacted. So we need to understand our responsibility and see exactly how our seemingly not impacting activities might actually lead to some other catastrophic event somewhere else. So I think we need to look at things in connection to other things. So if we sort of look out both local and global, sort of zoom in, zoom out, and look at the picture holistically, then we will know how we can help, or how we can actually not destroy. We can helping is other thing. You could always get yourselves involved. If you want to directly help, you could always get yourselves involved with some organizations who are working in the marine areas. You could also speak against the issues. So there are many ways, I guess, to help. And if you are young kids, like I was mentioning, if you're actually concerned about these issues, so taking up something, writing, I think writing is a wonderful tool. And these days, content writing and writing about these issues, you could write up a blog, in a newspaper article, you could send your write up. So these ways you can raise awareness about these issues. So yeah, probably if there is any other question. Yeah, I don't think there's another question. So yeah, so there are many organizations or people who are working on ground. Definitely, you could follow their work. You could write to them. Going forward, I think we get a lot of emails from young students, from college goers, for internships, to understand more about what systems, I mean, the coastal and marine systems we work with. So definitely these are ways to learn more. And once we understand about these systems more, we can definitely help in a deeper way. But that doesn't mean we cannot do some things at what our current understanding level is. So making ourselves aware is the first step, I guess. Okay. I see a question from Rimli. What are the top 3 challenges that you face? I think that's a very good question, because there are definitely a lot of challenges in this field, especially in the environmental field, because there are a lot of different sort of pressures. One thing is, so for us, I think it's very easy to say, that farmers are using, I would again give this example because I think this is easy to understand, relate for most of us, that they are using pesticides, which we always complain about. Or fishers are using, I mean, they are catching sharks and rays. We all look at, I mean, see these documentaries, and how are people impacting, right? How poachers kill wildlife. We all, I think most of us are aware of these things. But this may be one or two incidents like that, but we ignore the larger pressures which are there, development pressures. Like while we work in the marine and coastal sector, we see there is every day there are plans to make this huge ports, huge roads on the coast. Then invest in deep sea fishing, investing which is more even extractive, which if 100 small scale fishing boats go to catch fish, and they can catch a certain amount of fish, one big boat, industrial boat, can go and catch that much fish in one day, you can say. So we need to look at those sort of things. We need to look at the larger pressure. So that always has been a challenge, that the policies the government is making is is not, we would think that they should be more towards the environment sustainability, because we are seeing environmental degradation daily. But going forward, every day, the policies or the laws which should actually protect the environment are getting diluted. So that is one thing. Being an environmentalist and working in this sector, I would say that has been a top challenge, that I think our government is not equally concerned about the environment as much as they should be. Then definitely at local level, the authorities whom we work with, who are actually looking at the managing of these resources locally, they are also not aware of many of the things. They have a certain perception to look at things. They need more awareness or more inclination to actually work towards the environment. And then in general, I think the we as urban people also, we do not look at how our consumption or our we impact. So I think though we might feel that we are not going and killing this animal, but our consumption pattern, our day-to-day activities are leading to killing of many animals, which we do not understand, which we do not directly see. Because of agriculture, lot of tropical rainforests are getting cut in Amazon. For the coffee we drink, it might be coming from some Western Ghat forest, and the forest is getting clear to grow those coffee plantations. So everything is linked, and I would say that if everybody who are the government officials, the policy makers, and the consumers are more aware of these things, and a little concerned about these things, then things will be much easier for the people who are trying to work for the environment.
Are there any more questions for the audience?
Anna, you can go ahead.
Yeah, you can actually ask, unmute yourself.
Hi, Ms. Madhuri. So I just have another question for you. So with the rising population, usage of harmful materials like plastic is also increasing rapidly. But it's very hard to completely rid ourselves of plastic. So as an environmentalist, what is your point of view to this problem?
Raina, your voice was not very clear. Can anybody repeat the question? There was a noise behind, so I couldn't, or maybe you could just drop it at the chat as well. Yeah, that will be good actually. Yeah, that is a very good question again, Raina. And I do understand and agree that it is very difficult to completely take out plastic from our lives, because it has become an important part. And the plastic is such a material which is very diverse. It is easily producible and is used in different ways. But what we need to look at is what sort of plastic is it. So there are different categories of plastic, and again I would stress on the point that looking deeper into the issue. So plastics, what sort of plastic is it, how many times we can use it, firstly dividing it into single use or multiple use. There I use this plastic bottle. Many people ask me that you talk about environment, you're concerned about environment, how do you use a plastic bottle? I have been using this bottle since last 2 years. So, and I might use it for another 2-3 years. So it ultimately boils down to what is the product which you are using. So somebody also told me that in my kitchen there are plastic whatever dabbas and all, and why don't I throw it out? Throwing is very easy, and that is why the issue lies. That is where the issue lies. What are we throwing? Again, the question comes back to that. So if somebody gets a polythene cover to my house, I immediately, I mean, sometimes I just shout on them, be it, an elderly person. I mean, that is not the way to go about it. But the thing is that single use plastic, I mean, if you get a cover, if you buy vegetables and you get a cover, which you will just throw it in the dustbin, that is not something which we should do, because that doesn't make that is not a good way to use this material, right? If plastic chairs are there which you are using years over years, there are plastic bowls which you are using years over years, and then they could be reused in different ways. So again, reusing is something which is very interesting here. So looking at reusing, repurposing, upcycling, recycling, all these are important. But something like most of the single use plastics, like wrappers, like biscuit wrappers, like chips wrappers, so I have almost stopped eating all these stuff because they are non recyclable mostly. So if you are using some plastic which you can give it to the plastic recycling agents, then it is still okay to use, I would say. But plastics which are non-recyclable, which you will just use and throw, that is something which is not okay. So I think that is my point, and I think that is point the most environmentalists would agree with, that completely avoiding plastic is something which will take time, but in the meantime, reducing single use plastics is the way to go.
I don't think we have any other questions.
So do I. We'll just wait a minute, and if there are no other
Yeah.
questions, we can start. Okay, I don't think there seem to be any questions, so I guess we can end it now. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your time. It was a very interesting, informative, and fascinating interview. We learned a lot, definitely. So thank you so much for your time.
I'm glad. And thanks for you guys again. Yeah, I got an opportunity to share my thoughts. And when in the future also, you're always welcome. You can just write or drop a message to me. Anybody who are listening also could reach out. I could share my email ID here, maybe, if you have any more questions. Yeah, you could just drop an email here. And I would love to clarify if there are any further questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Raika, Chaviv, and Sanvi, and everyone else, and Neha and Sanjeev also. Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Bye then. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you so much, ma'am. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.